Hello, my name is Bláithín Hurley and I'm a Senior Library Assistant in the Central Library in Waterford. And I'm going to talk to you today about a history of the development of libraries in Waterford City. So I'll just share my screen and we can get started. Now, as I said, I work in the Central Library. And because of that, I have easy access to the information and the resources that we have in the local studies collection at the library itself. And so using those resources, I'm going today to have a look at the development of libraries in Waterford City. Of course, to do this, I will have to take a little step back in time to the introduction of the printing press to Waterford. Because in order to have the need for a library, you need to first of all produce books to fill the library space. And although we are told by E.R. McClintock in this article that the printing press was first introduced into Waterford in the 16th century, it was not until the 17th century that printed works became more widely available. Here we have a rare example of a frontispiece of a book rather grandly entitled A Remonstrance of Grievances Presented to His Most Excellent Majesty in the Behalf of the Catholics of Ireland. This book was printed by Thomas Burke in Waterford in 1643, and as can be gleaned from the title, religion was quite a contentious issue in 17th century Waterford, and the city's printing presses were not only used to produce books, but also propaganda pamphlets for both sides in the ongoing rebellions that took place throughout that century. Pamphlets were a quick, easy and relatively cheap way to get the message out to people. Books, however, were another matter entirely. They were expensive and for the most part out of the ready reach of the ordinary man in the street. Although it should be noted that many people were illiterate or native Irish speakers at that time, and this meant that books published in English or Latin, the language of academia and the religious, were of little interest to them. Private collections of books remained the preserve of the wealthy classes for most of the 18th century. But by the time we get to the 19th century, we can start to see a change coming about. The ending of the penal laws and the introduction of the national school system saw a rise in literacy, and as is demonstrated in this excerpt from Harvey's Almanac and Directory of 1866, the printing and publishing business was a thriving one in Waterford. We also have a mention of librarians, and this tells us that the demand for the access to books by a wider public was being called for. Book collectors and the owners of private libraries were still much in evidence. There was a substantial library owned by John Congreve of Mount Congreve, but this was a private collection, and unless you knew John Congreve personally or knew someone who could make an introduction on your behalf, you couldn't access his library. And often, once the owners of large private libraries died, their collections were dispensed of, as was the case of Dr. Foran, the Catholic Bishop of Waterford's library. We can see here in this advertisement in the Freeman's Journal that his unique and excellent library is to be auctioned off. Christchurch Cathedral, the Church of Ireland Cathedral, was very lucky to have had a diocesan library within its walls since 1779. And as we can see from this cutting from the Munster Express of 1864, the Bishop of Cashel had donated a choice selection of standard works on divinity to the library for the use of his clergy. Now, it's good to see that the Bishop has donated his books to a library, but it was not the sort of library which was either available or indeed would have appealed to the wider public. But libraries were beginning to widen their accessibility. In 1828, we read in the Freeman's Journal that Sir John Newport made a donation of some selected works from his private library to the library of the Waterford Mechanics' Society. This was a library which was accessible to students and members of the society. And in 1841, Mr. and Mrs. Hall, while travelling through Ireland, visited the library attached to the Christian Brothers School in Waterford and noted that it contained about 400 religious and literary works. And returning to the Waterford Mechanics' Society, which by 1853 had become Waterford Mechanics Scientific Institute, and the Waterford News and Star tell us that they had rented a building which was to be used only by the Institute, so no sharing. This premises was going to accommodate lectures given by eminent professors, as well as a library, a reading room, and a newsroom. In fact, reading rooms and newsrooms were by now beginning to spring up all over the city. They were accommodated either through an attachment to a society or club, or to some places of work. One example of this would be the Post Office Library and Reading Room, which was set up for the use of Post Office employees in 1878. Although it's only a general distinction, usually reading rooms provided books for club members to read and newsrooms provided newspapers, but this was by no means a hard and fast rule. Popular newspapers at the time would have been the Freeman's Journal and the Gentleman's and Citizen's Almanac, while popular reviews and magazines were the Gentleman's Magazine, the London Magazine, and the American Review, which shows that readers were interested in what was happening abroad. Circulating libraries were now becoming popular too, and these operated through a membership fee system. This ad for the Waterford Circulating Library details what those charges are. To have first-class membership meant that you got access to new publications, and that cost you £1 and 1 shilling per annum. Second class membership, which meant that you had to wait 12 months for your access to new books, or the books had to be out for at least 12 months before you could access them, and your charge was 7 shillings and 6pence. We see here Mrs. Dawson advertising her room paper warehouse, The Quay in Waterford. But she's advertising more than that. She's telling us that she's opening a circulating library, and she's telling her potential members that she hopes to keep her customers supplied with a supply of the best authors. By 1894, Egan's Guide shows us that the readership and accessibility of libraries had opened up with the establishment of circulating libraries, which were attached to shops, such as the one attached to Mrs. Dawson's shop, but also to grocery shops. There were also a number of newsrooms, which sometimes got a bad reputation for being nothing more than drinking clubs or nationalist hotbeds, and the title Repeal Newsroom might easily lead one to believe that this is true. Circulating libraries tended to stock popular novels, and those attached to grocery and drapery shops had large female memberships. As we come towards the end of the 19th century, we can see that Waterford had a ready supply of libraries open to the public. Egan's Guide includes in its directory a number of publishers, booksellers and private clubs. Clubs such as the Literacy Club, the National and Commercial Club and the Working Men's Club, all of which had either reading rooms or newsrooms. In 1877, the passing of the Public Libraries Act in Parliament meant that the need for public libraries was formally recognised. In 1894, a public meeting of Waterford citizens took place. A committee was formed, a premises was obtained at Adelphi Terrace, and the library, whose stock included 200 volumes which formed part of a grant from the Stationery Office, opened in 1896. And that grant is described in this letter from John Redmond MP, which was published in the Waterford News and Star on the 3rd of October 1896. But it was not until the intervention of Andrew Carnegie, the Scottish-American philanthropist, that the reality of public libraries as we know them came to Ireland. Carnegie provided grants to enable the library movement in Ireland build suitable library premises. The way it worked was that the local town clerk or the chairman of the library wrote to Carnegie asking for information. He would then be sent a form asking about the district's population and details of any existing library service. If the form was completed satisfactorily, then a sum of money was promised on condition that the Libraries Act be adopted, a free site provided, and a suitable design for the library produced. In 1901, the Waterford Committee applied to Carnegie for funding, and a grant for £5,000 was made to the city to house a new free public library, as the property at Adelphi Terrace was now deemed inadequate, detailed in this article in the Evening Herald. In 1903, Andrew Carnegie arrived in Waterford to lay the foundation stone for the library at Lady Lane on a site donated by Alexander Nelson. Carnegie was also awarded the Freedom of the City by Waterford Corporation. This was exciting news which travelled far and wide, as demonstrated by this article in the Fermanagh Herald. Central Library, however, didn't stay in Lady Lane for very long, and in the middle of the last century it moved to O'Connell Street, and for a short time it went to Ballybricken, but in 2004, following extensive renovations, which can be seen taking place in these photographs, it opened its doors again. And this is the library you see today. Libraries in Waterford may have changed much over the past few centuries, but at Lady Lane, new members are always welcome. Thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the talk just as much as I enjoyed researching it. Thank you.